Sure. Sometime in the middle of last year, we started to think about, what are some of the new content verticals we can get into and why. And when we started analyzing content consumption trends across India, both in urban centers as well as smaller towns, we started to notice that a few sectors, a few categories were doing very well. The fastest growing category we saw without a doubt was gaming. And we said, obviously there's a lot of young Indians that are now becoming professional gamers or semi-professional gamers, and there's an opportunity to create some sort of an offering there, which is kind of how we really emphasize gaming on loco. But then among the other categories, one of the fastest growing categories was animation. And historically, when you look at animation, it is focused on children. It's focused on cartoons and kind of stuff that parents don't necessarily enjoy, but they have to endure. And then we said, when you dug deeper into animation, we started to realize that people who were expressing an interest in animation were of two broad types. One was the urban consumer who is comfortable watching an animated series in English. So they're watching anything from Simpsons or Family Guy or South Park or BoJack Horseman or Rick and Morty or whatever. And the other is the individual from a smaller town who also wants to consume animation for young adults, but prefers to do that in Hindi or some other regional language. And both of these categories are not the traditional animation consumers who are historically kids. So we said there's a huge opportunity here. It's a fast growing audience. And what if we were to build an animation offering that could cater to people living in urban India as well as smaller towns, but also have it be relevant to them, stories about them, stories they identify with, obviously done in an animated manner, in a funny, over the top, exaggerated, humorous manner. And so that's kind of how we launched the channel. The focus right now is currently on kind of getting Hindi speaking audiences across both urban and non-urban centers to start following the channel. We've been around a couple months now, and we've seen good traction with short form content. And most recently, we just launched our first series, our first kind of long format show called Namune, which has done quite well for us. So season one just concluded last week. Um, and I think the path forward, like you asked, Dipali, is that we will continue to create more short form content. We will continue to try to identify which areas of content work really well for the audience. And we'll try to expand that, not just on our Instagram page, but also our YouTube channel, also Facebook and any other mediums where we find that. So it is, and I'd love to take credit and be this like really smart guy who thought of this opportunity during the pandemic and all of that. But the truth is that we launched the channel before the pandemic. We This plan was in motion from late last year. We did a bunch of test content, piloting. We piloted a lot of animated content starting November last year. And we really, what we did do when the pandemic happened, like you rightly said, is we identified that animation is a huge opportunity because you can produce it without having to be physically present at a particular location. And so we scaled up. Until the pandemic, we were doing roughly 2 to 3 videos or short videos a week. After the pandemic, in the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we upscaled ourselves, and we're doing now about 20 short videos a week, as well as 2 episodes of the long form series, which was going on for the past 5 or 6 weeks. So we recognize the opportunity. We realize that it's very easy to scale up when you don't have to be physically producing on a set. And so we took advantage of the pandemic in that sense. But the plan was already in place. It just required us to invest some more time. Yeah, I think it's too early because we still have to build and establish the presence of the channel in the Hindi belt. So that's obviously going to be mission number one. Once we find a reasonable amount of traction there, then I think we will explore other languages and also making things more urban, right? There's also an audience that is fully accustomed to animated series, that is very well versed with the format in urban India, and we will also try to cater to them. There's the potential to do series on Amazon, Netflix, and Hotstar and these kind of platforms. So we look at it kind of holistically, and regional language content will feature in there, but it may not be the first thing we get to. So I'll just kind of repeat that point. What I was saying was that on the content side, the experience that we have with creating content, large volumes of content, and understanding kind of what consumers really want, right? The psychology of why they want something, why they share it, how they spread it organically. That comes in very handy because then we can apply some of those lessons and learnings to animation as well. On the distribution side, there's two big advantages we have. One is that, historically, having used a lot of tech and a bunch of, audience data to grow our distribution across different platforms, right? Whether that's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or whatever, knowing how to do that, having done that multiple times before, we are able to use those learnings and do it again with Jambo. The other advantage on distribution is the fact that we have a large audience already on these other channels, right? So between Filter Copy, Dice, Gobble, we probably have 20, 25 million subscribers across platforms. The minute we put out a piece of content on Jambo and we share it from Filter Copy or from Dice or from Gobble, all of a sudden already audiences already paying attention to Jambo and starting to follow the channel. So we have a huge distribution advantage there. And then lastly, on the monetization bit, I think we've got a very large sales team that already communicates with hundreds of brands. We do. I would imagine we're doing a couple hundred meetings every month or probably every week, even with the size of team we have. And if that's happening, then all of a sudden we can start to cross sell, Jambo through those sales conversations, right? So anyone who's already having a conversation with a brand for Filter Copy or for Dice can start to weave in Jambo into their campaigns or can start to target those advertisers. So we have an advantage with every new channel that we create of already having the infrastructure and the know-how from the existing channels, and we use that quite. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the obvious things that one might imagine, right? There's a lot more consumption happening. I think the focus on long form is higher in the evening periods, especially because people after they're working during the day, in the evenings because they don't have a commute, they're not spending time traveling. They're consuming a lot more long form content. I think the biggest beneficiaries of that are of course the streaming platforms that have movies and shows on them. We see that with our YouTube, with Dice Media, for example, we see our shows are getting consumed for longer periods. We saw that with Namone on Jambo as well. At the same time, like fundamentally the behavior of consumption, how people consume, why, when, that hasn't fundamentally changed a whole lot. It's just more number of people are doing it and they're doing it for longer periods of time. But the rest of the fundamentals remain the same. We are seeing increased consumption, obviously, on Gobble because, with food being
Mm.
something that people are searching for as they are thinking about what to cook at home, because more and more people are cooking by themselves for the first time, as well as travel on Gobble, because people can't travel physically. We end up seeing a lot of people consume travel content in an attempt to kind of vicariously travel through the. Yeah, I think it had multiple phases, right? In the beginning, what ended up happening was that a lot of advertisers didn't know whether or not they should market, what they should do, how they should react. So even though consumption was very high in kind of mid to late March, advertisers were not, there were a lot of legacy deals that had been done in Feb and stuff that were being executed, but new deals at the end of March were suddenly lower. But what happened starting, mid-April was people realized that okay, this is not going to be just a 21-day lockdown anymore. This is likely to be a few months, and we can't stop advertising for a few months because we have to continue to sell our products. And so then advertisers needed a bit of education on, or not education, but I suppose advice on how do you align with the consumer? How do you not appear unempathetic? How do everyone's struggling with a lockdown and financial hardship and people are losing jobs. You don't want to be like, hey, mera product kharido, right? It looks very cold and unempathetic. So, we did a lot of work with advertisers to help them understand how to lean into the content, how to lean into audience sentiment. So we saw campaigns pick up from kind of mid-April onwards. And we're seeing a healthy amount of advertising happening, especially May and June have been very, very good. The other thing we saw from a trend perspective is that a lot of advertisers are looking to individual influencers or running campaigns with several individual influencers as an effective means because The another big beneficiary of the lockdown has been influencers because they're doing a lot more content, and people are consuming a lot. The Instagram lives have become very common. Posts on Instagram are being viewed and consumed a lot more. So we found that on the talent management side of our business, where we run influencer marketing campaigns for advertisers, we saw a lot more interest there. The revenues there have grown dramatically over the last 2 or 3 months. So I think net net the advertising market hasn't for us has not affected us as bad as one might think from the outside. And it's also because we've had a diverse number of revenue lines, as well as the fact that we've been very very adaptive to the current. Yeah, look, I think OTTs have obviously benefited from audiences wanting to consume content during the lockdown. I also think the OTT business is a bit of a habit-forming business, and once you cord cut and you spend a lot of time on OTTs, and that becomes your primary means of consumption. So I think OTTs will benefit from that. I think it's also interesting to see because a lot of the broadcaster OTTs, the likes of Sony and like Boot and Z, are now starting to recognize that they can't just make very, very low cost shows and still compete for audience attention with the likes of Netflix, Amazon, or even Hotstar. And so you're seeing them invest more, right? So Hotstar is obviously doing, better scale, bigger scale. Sony is going to do the same thing with some of the trailers they launched. I think we'll see that with Boot Select has done a couple of shows slightly larger as well. So I think the playing field is becoming a little bit more competitive. That said, I think OTT still have a long way to go in understanding consumers, understanding what they want. Everybody is focused on a few specific genres with one type of consumer in mind, but they haven't really spent enough time to build a bouquet of. You look at these OTT platforms, and you have to think they're a hypermart. That's what they are. So you have to have content that satisfies the younger female audience, the older male audience, the middle-aged family audience, all types, all shapes and sizes. So right now, I think we're seeing a lot of sameness. A lot of people are creating similar stuff. Everybody wants one of these like gangster shows. Everybody wants to do one of these like Homeland Security type, raw intelligence kind of shows. And I think it'll be interesting to see how and when they adapt to creating different genres, different types of comedies, different types of dramas, different types of horrors, different types of like that expansion of the slate. I think will be quite interesting to watch.